perhaps you'd like to know how this session will proceed. So always helpful to know what's coming at you for the hour. So we're going to begin with our baseline, which is the Bongo Virtual Classroom. From there, we're going to move into MS Teams, and we're going to speak from the cautionary tale side. So we're going to present some items you should be aware of and really keep an eye on. Of course, MS Teams and versus meetings versus team sites is important to discuss. MS Teams and MS Stream, the distinction there for video. And then all together, we're going to bring it full circle back to teaching and address your questions. It is our intention that by the end of this session, you'll be able to recognize some potential pitfalls of using MS Teams for synchronous teaching and learning. You'll be able to identify compelling reasons for using MS Teams for synchronous delivery, and you'll be able to choose from the available Teams features to engage students in synchronous learning time. And now, as I said, we have Jan joining us on the telephone, and she has pre-recorded audio for us to listen to. So what I'm going to do now is to stop presenting, and I'm going to share her slide in a different way to ensure that everybody can hear the audio.
Up until the pivot to remote teaching as a result of the pandemic, most lectures were pre-recorded with a tool like Camtasia and uploaded to the course content area primarily for the fully online offerings. The learning management system, Learn, has been the backbone of overall supplemental course delivery. However, it's been a bit light on lecture delivery tools. 3 UW-supported options exist for lecture delivery. There are others, but these are the most common: MS Teams, Bongo Virtual Classroom, and WebEx. In addition, while not currently officially supported on campus, we recognize a lot of instructors are also using Zoom. Today, I'm going to focus the lens on Bongo Virtual Classroom and MS Teams. What do they have in common? Well, both provide whiteboard options, screen sharing. They both have breakout rooms, the ability to record lecture for later viewing, inviting external guests, so those folks outside of the University of Waterloo, closed captioning, polling, and the ability to see a raised hand. Where they differ is the level of integration with Learn. Virtual Classroom is native to the course environment and exists as part of the Connect drop-down menu, so it's easy for the students to locate it as it is contained within the Learn course. The limitation with Virtual Classroom is the number of students who can join a meeting, 150 versus 300 in Teams. The number of visible webcams, 7 versus 49 in Teams. Both can be recorded, but Teams has a waiting lobby and permissions can be set to prohibit downloading the recorded meeting. Virtual Classroom has been used very successfully in smaller classes, particularly a class like a graduate course or for oral exams. And Teams has been the choice for larger classes where group work and private channels are used extensively.
This is the screen that now summarizes the information that Jan shared with us in her audio file. And I'm now going to pass the presenting baton over to Carol and Stephen.
Thanks, Monica. So in this section, we'll talk a bit about things to look out for when you're using Microsoft Teams for teaching. A lot of times users might assume that features that are available in other apps like Zoom or WebEx are also available in Teams, but that's not always the case. So I'll be going over dragging and dropping emails in Outlook and how that relates to Teams, and some of the limitations of breakout rooms in Teams. And Stefan will go over the many faces of Teams and how Microsoft Stream works with Teams. So with dragging and dropping emails, a lot of people are used to using email folders to sort and categorize their emails. This can cause some confusion now that Outlook also shows Teams group folders. So here I have 2 folders called Psych 101. So this first folder that's shown as a subfolder under my inbox, I created by just right-clicking on my inbox and selecting New Folder. And the second folder that's shown as a subfolder under Groups was created automatically when I created a Microsoft team called Psych 101. So Folders listed under groups shouldn't be treated as regular email folders because the content in these folders is actually shared with all members of a Microsoft team. So for example, if an instructor accidentally drags and drops an email from a student into their team's group folder called Psych 101 in Outlook, they might not realize that this is a shared Teams folder, and by doing this, the email that they've dragged and dropped is now being shared with everyone who is a member of that Psych 101 team. And unfortunately, this feature cannot be disabled. This drag and drop feature was actually a highly requested feature by users to Microsoft, but there are some things that we can do to reduce the chances of accidentally sharing emails in these folders. So something to note, users who use the Outlook desktop application on Windows computers will receive this warning message when they try to drag and drop their emails into a Teams group folder. So the error message says, "Are you sure you want to move this message into the Psych 101 group?" Others will be able to see the message content. Outlook for Mac doesn't seem to allow for email drag and drop into group folders currently, so you shouldn't have an issue with accidentally sharing emails if you're using Outlook for Mac. And the Outlook web app in a web browser does allow you to drag and drop into the group folder and does not give you this warning message. So that's something to be mindful of if you use the Outlook web app. So while the warning message acts as a preventative measure, some user learning is still required in order to not drag and drop emails into these group folders accidentally. So one thing I would recommend for people who want to organize their emails in their inbox is to use Outlook categories instead of creating email folders. So here I have an example of 2 emails I want to associate with my Psych 101 course. So instead of putting these emails into a folder, I'm going to right-click on the email and select Categorize and apply a category. So here I've created a custom category called Psych 101. And you can create custom categories by clicking on the All Categories button near the bottom and selecting New from the pop-up window. The other categories shown, pink, purple, yellow, green, orange, red, these are default categories in Outlook. So when I apply my category to these 2 emails, you'll see there are blue boxes beside the emails that correspond with the Psych 101 category. And in the expanded email, the Psych 101 category label shows up there as well. And to search for all emails labeled as Psych 101, I can click on the search field at the top of the Outlook application and go to search for categorized items and select the Psych 101 category from there, which will show me all emails that have been labeled using this category. Next is breakout rooms. So breakout rooms in Teams are similar to breakout rooms in other conferencing platforms. So they allow meeting organizers to divide meeting participants into smaller subgroups to have discussions or brainstorming sessions. So some things to keep in mind when using breakout rooms in Teams: participants cannot be pre-assigned before the meeting starts. Participants cannot move freely between breakout rooms. So right now, only the meeting organizer is able to do this. And participants who leave the breakout room also leave the meeting and need to rejoin. So the meeting organizer can actually change the meeting settings to allow participants to directly rejoin the meeting after they leave the breakout room, but this isn't enabled by default. So if this setting is not enabled, participants who leave the breakout room will have to rejoin the meeting from their Teams or Outlook calendar. And now I will pass it over to Stefan.
Be nice if I unmuted before I started talking. There you go. So I'm just going to have a number of slides here. I'm not going to speak to every point. Just for thoroughness, I've included a number of additional bulleted points. Microsoft Teams is a wonderful tool, but it's not a single tool, is the point of what I'm going to touch on here. It's a big box of Lego, and it doesn't have an instruction guide really on how the pieces fit together. So I'm just going to cover through the main components and then talk about some of the other ways it connects. So mainly think of Microsoft Teams as a Swiss Army knife or a hub that connects a whole bunch of additional services together. So the first component I'm going to talk about is chat. And chat is the direct messaging component. So you can have one-on-one conversations. It's text-based chat for the most part, but you can do file sharing, upload media files. You can do spontaneous meetings. The other way to use chat is as a group chat. And so group chat then becomes a sort of alternate way of doing meetings that are ongoing with a group. It's really useful for students if they're working on projects to create their own group chats and working together. The one key point in this, and so on my slides, I'll have a little warning symbol, something to think about, is that when you're doing the chat sharing, the file sharing, the person that uploads the file, and this is true also in the chat that's part of a Teams meeting, that file actually goes on your personal OneDrive. So whoever's uploaded that file is still in the is still the owner of that file. They can remove access to anyone else from that file. So if that file is really meant to be something that the group needs longer term, that's where the team site or the Teams for Teaching site is really useful in storing that file where the group owns it rather than the individual. This sometimes tends to be more of a problem outside of the classrooms because longer term access to that file becomes a bit of an issue as people change their roles at the university. So that's the chat component. Meetings, which is what we're in right now, have a whole range of components allowing for audio, video. So that's what we're doing right now. The file sharing, so the sharing of individual files and content for the meetings, such as agendas. The actual chat component as well, so you can have text chatter going on in the side as people are talking. So it's a rich dynamic environment, but each of those components is managed in a slightly different way. And again, this component, so both chat and meetings, have nothing to do with the classroom site itself. They can be linked, but they're independent products. The screen sharing portion works for the most part quite well across all platforms. Sometimes on Macs in particular, there's the awareness on the part of people who own their device to change their settings so that screen sharing can be done properly. You don't need to be a member of the organization to actually join a Teams meeting. You don't have to have a Teams account. So there are different ways of joining, and basically it's in the instructions. So that's something to be aware of as well. It does allow for externals or guests to join. The content is persistent in your Teams meeting. So people can go back in time with that link. People can share that link and not have been part of the original meeting. And if you do repeating meetings and you're adding and removing guests, they don't lose access to the history of that content and the ongoing content. You have to think about sort of how you manage them. So the chat in particular functions like a group chat. Individuals can be removed from that chat. So you can remove them from the meeting and forget to remove them from the chat. Something to think about. Which means that if it's a confidential or instructions that you sort of want to limit to a particular group or a collective, don't do repeating meetings, do separate meetings. So something to be aware of. The team site itself, or the Teams for Teaching, Teams for Learning group, which is really based off, and Carol touched on that nicely with the Microsoft 365 group. So Microsoft really, in terms of the way this ecosystem works, really depends on groups. And groups are given additional functionality and additional access to content. So the group is the key, and that's why figuring out how to synchronize the team roster, the Learn rosters with team was really important. That gives you basic ability to have that classroom available. That's one reason why you end up with a team site. A side effect of creating a Microsoft 365 group is it activates a team site by default. So they're interconnected. There are other components that can be layered on. That group is a permissions group. And so it allows access to various components that are added. Within the team site itself, content is organized within this concept of channels. And you really, and this is the part where people get really messed up, is that channels portion, because it seems like chat as well, but it's not chat. It's a discussion forum in many ways. It's got additional tools associated with it, including a file storage that's basically a SharePoint site. That in turn has its own structure and its own permissions and its own set of rules. For the most part, you're just interacting with it the way the Teams application interface allows you to interact with it, so it's fine. Within that context, there's different ways of managing those files as well. So you can pin files, you can pin folders, so it's easier to see content as well. But remembering that the channels themselves, as they're organized, they have their own sort of little mini storage for files. And then if you start to get into private channels, which is a subset of the group, in order to be part of that private channel, that private group, you must be part of the larger group. It's a subset. There's no way out of that. It's a little container. But the flip side of that, a private channel excludes the entire group to start with, which means certain add-ons, a number of different things that depend on a Microsoft group will not work in a private channel. So private channels are really great in terms of limiting access, who can do what. They're not so great in terms of management, in terms of permissions, in terms of access to additional add-ons. So just a little caution. So in order to make this work in a classroom setting, collaboration is really the key to Teams. But when you're working in, especially in a large classroom, you really want to limit what the students can do. Our first experience in this was we just deployed Teams the way it was. And so really we want owners to be in charge of the settings, the channels, the ability to delete things. So now we set these settings. And so normally on a normal Teams, say Teams for Business to separate it from Teams for Classroom, normally all those checkboxes are checked basically, so that every team member can do things like create channels, make private channels, delete channels, restore channels, add apps, remove apps. That gets quite chaotic. Certainly a thoughtful application of how this is done. If you do want students to be adding and removing apps, then you do have to re-enable it. You can re-enable it for a short period while they get things configured for themselves, and then turn it off again so that additional apps aren't added. So just something to think about in terms of how you manage the site. The add-ons themselves are just infinite in terms of sort of what's available, the ability to add them, how you integrate them. You can add other access to other content through tabs as well within the team site, but the add-ons themselves, you basically look up through the add-ons lookup, and you'll look through the store. A number of those apps are not enabled for being added, so you will have to put in a request to the there's an IST form for that, to have that add-on enabled and made available. The basic ones that we're aware of have been enabled, and most Microsoft ones, such as Microsoft Stream, are available. Again, a lot of the Microsoft ones in particular are dependent upon the Microsoft 365 group, which means sometimes private channels, the add-ons just will simply not be available. It'll tell you, I can't add this. Microsoft Stream in itself, just switching over to that for a second. Yes, Scott, that is correct. Microsoft Planner, Scott just noticed that, noted that you do have to be enable that for members to add Microsoft Planner. So yeah, so you have to go back and forth on that. Microsoft Stream itself is available as so this is how the meeting is being recorded right now for reuse later. The Microsoft Stream platform really is a Microsoft video management and streaming platform. Think of it as YouTube for enterprise. The content is restricted to organization members only, which essentially just means there's no public or external sharing. So if you're collaborating, and I know with some of the science programs that are crossed with Guelph, this has become an issue, where a Guelph faculty member may be co-teaching and trying to get access, they will need a WhatIam account. They'll need to be within our ecosystem in order to access things like Stream and some of the other components that are dependent on being part of the full tenant. So that's a little added complication. Makes the security great, makes the limitation on sort of how that content is distributed kind of nice. Not so nice when you want to get outside of your silo. So, but we can manage that and get around that. Stream does integrate with Microsoft Teams. So as I mentioned, we're recording this right now. It provides the captioning. So if you need some sort of text as well and quite often once you record for accessibility purposes, you do want that captioning available. Stream itself as a platform allows for the editing of that. It doesn't allow a lot of additional editing. So you will want to perhaps have additional video editing tools, download the content, edit it, upload it back again, and you can have Stream fix the captioning for you, or you can download the captioning file and adjust that. The one thing to remember is whoever starts the recording will own the recording and will be responsible for adjusting permissions for the group. So a little cautionary tale. Permissions are great, but permissions can sometimes catch up to you. So that's all I had. That was a really quick overview of the entire box of Lego, and we'll let you try to figure out how those components fit together. So back to Monica.
Thank you for that marathon, Stephen. Very much appreciated. So yes, there's a lot of excellent advice there, lots of tremendous stuff. And I guess my role here, not I guess, I know my role here is to remind you to consider all of these pieces of information, all within the context of teaching. So just to highlight again, really my role here is to make sure that I'm bringing this all back to teaching, to make sure that we're focusing on all of these technical pieces within the context of what it is we actually want to do. And so I'm going to share with you here some things that our instructors have pointed out that their students really respond to well and that they themselves really find of value. So one of the pieces is this sort of ability within teams to extend the conversation before and after a meeting using the chat. So that piece that Stephen was referring to with respect to it living on, once the meeting has taken place in MS Teams, that the chat continues to exist. And that can be a very useful tool for extending thinking and allowing people kind of to hover around after class to talk about things. The reaction feature, as simple as it is within the MS Teams environment, whether meetings or whether using a team site, in the chat allows that ability to create a bit of community. And the other piece that it really does very nicely is to knit the chat to what's happening live. If you're able to juggle the two well. I necessarily am not the quickest monkey on the branch, but that is one of the things that you can do, is to ensure that people are actually reading the chat and it's being woven into the conversation that's taking place in the live session. It does have a robust closed captioning capabilities, and then, as Stephen also rightfully mentioned, the ability to edit those, which is a really nice piece. It's probably one of the strongest closed captioning pieces from all of our platforms when we look at the ones we support, so be it WebEx, training or meetings, or Bongo Virtual Classroom. Something else that our instructors have talked about, highlighted, is the announcement piece, the tool across breakout rooms, because in fact breakout rooms are the ones that are often used quite a bit across the different platforms, but specifically in Microsoft Teams. So that broadcasting piece where you can speak to all of your breakout rooms simultaneously, it's both very useful and works quite seamlessly. As was shared by Stephen, there is a whack ton of apps to choose from, particularly through the O365 area. It's all grouped together on that homepage for you. However, a caveat, this is a double-edged sword. Sometimes one can get carried away by all of these, creating additional wrinkles in terms of accessibility and in terms of usability as well. And sometimes the question has to arise, is it serving the purpose that you hoped, or is it becoming an unnecessary hurdle? That's just something to really think about. And very importantly on the teaching side is to consider how you're going to integrate your MS Teams experience into your Learn course site. So coming full circle, we do have a learning management system. That is where the foundation of your course exists. The question then arises, are you making it clear, and how are you making it clear to your students what happens in Teams, what happens in potentially Bongo Virtual Classroom, or certainly within Learn as a course site, and how do you navigate between the two with your students? And ultimately, this can be summarized in this statement at the bottom, that platform and tool decisions should always be driven by pedagogy first. So what we really encourage you to do is think about what you're using. Just because you can use it doesn't mean that you should or need to. So the question you ask yourself is, what is the value of doing something this way? What value does it add for my students? And how much of an effort is it on my part to execute this in a smooth way? So with that, we now arrive at the time for questions. So we've done a very good job. Thank you, Stephen, Carol, and Jan for your succinctness in all of the information you conveyed, because what we want to do now is open it up to the floor and make sure that you can pose the questions that are top of mind for you. So at this time, I'm going to encourage you either to raise your hand if you so desire, or feel free to post your question right into the chat. So whichever works for you, please let me know.
So, Monica, there's a couple of questions in the chat as well.
There are. Do you want to address those first then, Stephen? Did you have a chance to read them? You want to attend to those first?
Well, I just didn't want them to scroll off because we've got such an active community here. So Brandon asked about, is there for Teams or for Microsoft, a live polls or word cloud similar to Vivox? And I'm not certain about that. Are you aware, Monica?
I am not aware of that. I'm sorry. No, to be honest, just earlier this week, it was brought to my attention that how useful this could be. And so we're just quickly ramping up, getting some knowledge around it. We can definitely, though, let me insert at this time that we will look up answers we don't have on hand, and we will get back to you on those pieces.
So, all these questions, it's scrolling off my screen here. Tracy asked, how can you share content and be seen at the same time? I'll speak to that just because it is a bit of a challenge. One thing is for doing PowerPoint presentations. When you go to share, especially on Windows, you'll see this. The Mac shows it to some extent as well. You get to choose what you're sharing. Typically, we'll end up sharing the application or the content, but you can actually pick PowerPoint itself. And that does a nicer job of separating out sort of the PowerPoint from the chat and the other conversation on the side. Unfortunately, once you're presenting, everything else like the screens and the individuals get minimized at the bottom. And that's simply because the focus needs to be on the content. So it's kind of a balance. It's not entirely, some applications do much nicer of the little picture-in-picture. It's not in Microsoft Teams. Is there training on the editing portion? So that's I assume on stream. I know there was a stream presentation earlier. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. Our specialist on stream switched roles in IST. So I think his content is still there. I can look that up and see if we share that. I'm going to let you, Monica, switch to the people that have their hands up, because I think they were up before some of the chatter in the chat, just to balance this.
You bet. And bear with me, I have an extremely slow machine today, so I'm actually not seeing. I see Nadine because I see her on my screen. So Nadine, do you want to jump on? And you've got a hand up.
Sure. I have two questions. So my course that I am imagining switching over to Teams for is a non-credit course. And so what I've typically done is use the group functions to sort of reset everything for the next term's group in the same Learn community. If I were using Teams exclusively, would you recommend just starting a new team every term rather than trying to reuse the same team and reset all of that discussion? It sounds like all of that lives on forever. And my other question is about if, Monica, this is probably for you. Have you worked with any instructors who are using OneNote with Teams as sort of workbooks or handouts?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. Yes, we have. What most folks really like is the ability to use wikis. And so that does necessitate having a team site versus a standalone meeting. That's when wikis become available. And that is really nice because as Stephen was saying, if you do something like you taking notes during a meeting, that resides in the SharePoint site of the person who's created those notes. And please correct me if I'm wrong there, Stephen, jump on in. The wikis, however, reside within the team space. So it's accessible to everyone. Everyone can have access to those, and you can add them as tabs at the top of your team space, which is a really nice way to go. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but yes, that's been really something that people have really enjoyed and appreciated. It comes back to that hub aspect that Stephen was describing. It's sort of like the center of a spoke, and you can add things in quite seamlessly, and sometimes folks don't actually recognize what's a part of that main space and what's an add-on to that space. It's so seamless. Stephen, are you able to see the other hand? I know there's a hand up and I can't see it. I apologize to whoever is raising their hand for so long.
The other is Anton.
Anton, please, Anton, jump on in.
Yes, hello. So I actually have a comment, and it's pertaining to the ability to share whatever I know presentation you have. So I found a fantastic setting, and I just wanted to share what you can do. You can connect from multiple devices. So for example, I'm a Mac user. I can take my iPad, and let's say that I started the meeting on my laptop. Then I can connect from my iPad, start screen share on my iPad, move to, for example, to Notability and start writing on my iPad. So now everyone is seeing what I'm writing on the iPad, but I can also see the chat on my laptop, which is fantastic. And I can tell you even more. I never thought that this setup would work, but it's amazing. So I'm actually teaching on campus this term. And so what I really wanted to do is I want for my students to be able to connect while I'm teaching on, so they can come in either in person or they can attend online while listening to me. So here's what I did. In the podium, I connected my laptop, so people can see things with the projector. Okay. Then I'm connecting from the second device on my iPad, so now they can also see when I'm writing. But that's not enough. I want to record the video to post it later, right? So I need a good audio, but I want to also move across the room, right? So at this point, I connect my phone with headphones and I start the recording from my phone. So 3 devices are connected, and this way I can write, everyone can see, the quality of audio is great. And so my students have everything. So MS Teams is very flexible in that regard. So I'm very, very happy that with all the functionality that it provides.
Oh, we're going to have to recruit Anton to give a presentation on sort of, yeah, how to juggle. That's really what it's interesting. Thank you for raising that, Anton, because I actually have my iPad and I'm monitoring the chat on that. That's how I'm able to quickly go back and forth and see what people are posting. It's a great functionality. I also find as a presenter, and that's what Anton touched on, is sometimes I'll have my PowerPoint or whatever I'm presenting on one device and then monitoring sort of the chatter. The other way to do it is if you have somebody who can back you up. So like Monica and I have been trading off. So that's the other thing that does help, especially in larger groups. You do really need that second set of eyes. So I think for Nadine, we didn't answer part of her question, which is about the team itself. So if you have a team site and you want that content to go away, yeah, please do just archive it or delete it and have a new site created. That's the best way to get rid of that chatter and the channels if you don't need that anymore. There is also a way of archiving that, so the entire site becomes read-only if you want to refer to that, and you can ask me about the archive feature. It's a little bit hidden.
That's perfect.
Thank you. And Brandon noted that there's a couple of changes coming down the road, including the picture-in-picture type view for Teams. And that is, I joked at the very beginning, and some of you weren't here when I said that, which is Microsoft's trying to absorb what everyone else is doing because it's a very competitive market, and they really want these features that people are looking to have implemented. It just takes them a while. And even when it's available, it doesn't immediately appear in our tenant. So it does take some time to roll out.
And if I could point you to Kristen Brown's comment a little earlier, she was asking about lobbies, waiting room features in Teams as question part 1. Question part 2 is whether it's possible to have someone other than the meeting organizer run the breakout rooms.
Unfortunately, for the second part, the breakout rooms, it's right now it's limited. Microsoft says they're looking to change that. Part of it was the demand for breakout rooms was probably one of their most pressing ones. So I think they've rolled it out as a partial solution. It wasn't fully implemented. They wanted enough functionality that people could actually just at least have those. Because in the past, what people would do is they'd start like 5 meetings simultaneously and jump back and forth. A little painful. So that's going to get enhanced. The lobby waiting room feature, I'm not sure what you're wanting details there on that, Kristen.
Yeah, I think I was just curious. I know it was mentioned on one of the slides, so I'm wondering, does it work similarly to in WebEx, where it's really easy to like lock the meeting and let individual students come in, or is it more complex and kind of like a back end thing that we need to enable.
So you do need to enable it beforehand. You have to create the meeting. It's a little awkward, I find, with the options, and that's one complaint about the teams is you have to go back to, once the event's created, go back to, there's a little options feature in the meeting itself, so you'll see that displayed in Outlook. And then going into those options, you can adjust the way that meeting behaves, including enabling the fact that everyone has to be in the lobby or only people who are outside of your organization have to be in the lobby. I can't remember, they've made some other functionality changes, so I don't want to sort of speak to what my memory was of this 6 months ago. That just speaks to how quickly this is changing. I think they've added some nuance or granularity in terms of who can do the access, but I'd suggest just looking at those options and seeing what's possible. You can also, one of the other things you can do within those options is say who can be a presenter. Which can be really useful, especially in large groups where you don't want people stealing control, because that's available. Everyone by default is a presenter. So that's another thing you can go in after you've created the meeting and saying, I only want these 2 people to actually be presenters. So that's another functionality that's there.
And Stephen, can you confirm for us that in the breakout rooms, the default is that everyone's a presenter as well? So for the students, when it's a synced team, that happens, is that correct?
Carol, do you know? I think Carol knows a little more about breakout rooms than I do.
Sorry, you're asking if everyone's a presenter in a breakout room by default?
Yes, in the roster synced teams.
I'm actually not too sure. I'd have to look into that.
Yeah, I'm going to assume that that's the case, because that's typically how Teams has been working, where we'll give you, the idea is collaboration, and so in collaboration, you really want that functionality there. So the guess is probably. We'd have to go verify that.
No, fair enough. Fair enough. I know I ask on behalf of instructors who want everybody to be equal footing in the breakout rooms. There's one hand raised. I'm sorry I can't identify, but whoever it is, could they please just jump on in and ask their question?
Some guy named Jason.
Oh, is it Jason?
Yeah.
Jason, jump.
Hi. This actually goes back to something Nadine said, and I'll be looking to Stephen to maybe clarify. You were talking about, Nadine, the idea of keeping a team for a course, keeping going or archiving and whatnot, and you answered that a bit. I'm not sure, I'm sure it was mentioned earlier, but this idea of a roster sync team for courses seemed to make sense because it takes care of all of that if you request it through your Learn course. Jan mentioned that earlier, so I want to make sure that, but there's an example I have in a biology 4th year course where she uses a team as well now that we have access to it to continue the community as people become external. So she creates this community and has done it through Facebook and a few other things before. And now she's looking at the idea of teams where she has essentially alumni that are now in positions in human phys and reproduction that come back and do little pieces for the 4th year students to see what they're doing. So it's a really great way of keeping a team because we can do externals. So I wanted to give that example, but typically what I've seen are the teams are by the course each semester because of that privacy concern and stuff like that. Just a thought, and I don't know if Stefan has to add or Stephen has to add anything to that or not. Just an idea.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have Paul Dietrich here, right? Because he speaks, he's the person that sort of manages that and has been implementing that with the API that allows this to function. I will note I had a meeting with Paul and he wanted to he said, Stephen, can you share this, that we were enhancing the roster sync because it was taking almost half a day or longer for the sync. He's actually found a tweak, and the 40,000 users that he's got to sync on day 1, he can now do in under an hour because he found like there's this magic setting that I can do. So right now, the only so Jason, if you can sort of summarize your question again, I got sidetracked in my excitement of talking about Paul.
yeah. Paul is amazing, and his action on that stuff was almost within the day. It was amazing. To get the roster to work quicker. It wasn't really a question, it was a comment to Nadine to say this idea of using Learn to have a rostered team. Right. One of the limitations that I think Anton brought up in another session was the lack of group sync, because you might have sections and whatnot. That might be a new feature coming. So I just want to see the advantage of that over not doing that.
Well, the advantage is that a lot of the team functionality allows you to add one user at a time. So that's where the pain in the private channels is. So if you have a class of, say, 300 students, and you want to break them into, groups for the 30 private channels you can have. So I'm going to throw 10 students into each of those 30. I have to add 10 students to each of those channels one at a time, and it's a bit tedious. Paul is looking at sort of how he can work with that, because quite often instructors have already set up some of those groups and Learn, and so he is looking at how to pull that. The advantage of working with groups clearly is that the groups themselves become security objects. So if you need to do things like, I want to limit access to this particular function, so stream, for example, I'm going to throw a video and I want group 1 to watch this video and I want group 2 to watch this video. That's how you can manage it. So that's the advantage of doing this thing. Otherwise, you don't need a team site to get some of the functionality that you might want to do, especially in smaller classrooms, smaller groups of students. Do a Teams meeting, do a group chat, right? So those functions can enhance what you're doing in Learn, can enhance what you're doing, might be doing Bongo. You don't need the team site in that roster sync classroom. You do need it if you want to manage your permissions and you don't want to add one student at a time. So that's the trade-off.
Stephen, if I may, it's just a footnote to that. For those folks that maybe are new to MS Teams or maybe new to synchronous teaching in general, you've maybe done a lot of your work asynchronously. Just a footnote that all of our platforms, that is to say, whether it's Bongo, Virtual Classroom, WebEx, MS Teams, do not carry over the teams that are made in Learn. So you have to recreate groups. So when we talk groups, just be very careful. They're not perhaps discussion groups you've already set up in your LMS. Just a footnote there. Stephen, if I may, Carol asked a question earlier here. She says, can students change their identity to be anonymous? And if so, can that be disabled?
Yeah, so they cannot be anonymous when they're logging in directly through the application, because you have to log in as yourself. So that students do have to do it that way. However, the little sneaky way is, oh, I'm going to connect by phone like Jan did. And so you do get the opportunity to say who you are because you're calling from a phone number. Now the phone number is displayed or is accessible. So, you can sort of go, wait a minute, I can figure this out. So just considering sort of some of the ways that people might anonymize themselves. Otherwise, it's a bit challenging. They could possibly reuse the link and then try to pop in through a browser session without logging in. So that is possible. In that case, you're kind of stuck. One of the things then is the lobby saying that, no, you have to be within this group that I've defined. So there are ways of sort of playing with it. For the most part, students really have to try to be sneaky. And typically you can figure that out, right? Because it's like, there's only a certain number of people here and I don't see this one. So I know who this is. So it's really hard to be anonymous when it's already a defined group to start with, is my other comment. But, people don't think about these sort of consequences.
I'm just trying to scroll through the various MS chat contributions here to make sure we haven't forgotten anything. But if anyone does have a question, feel free. Don't believe we have a queue for jumping in and asking your question verbally, so please feel free.
Yeah, I see a ongoing discussion and a lot of self-help here on the shared whiteboard.
Yeah.
I think Brandon is our whiteboard expert, so I'll say, call Brandon. But just noting that one of the add-on features is the whiteboard, and especially if you're working from the Microsoft ecosystem, that Microsoft whiteboard really works well. And Brandon in particular, he's got a Surface, it looks like, so it does integrate nicely. So just a little comment, just summarizing that conversation in case people didn't see it.
Thank you. And I saw Scott, you raised your hand. Please jump on in.
Yep. So I'm wondering if Stephen can speak to private teams, or not private teams, private channels and meetings and recurring meetings, and what works and doesn't work with that. Like, so for profs who want to have lots of groups, private groups for students to collaborate together and then have ongoing meetings for themselves and with the prof.
Yeah. So private channels, and this speaks to the fact that you're thinking, oh, well, if I'm in the team and I'm going to do a Teams meeting for the team itself, which appears typically in one of the normal channels, not a private channel. And that's because it can grab that group, right? So Psych 101 is a group. I can grab that membership and invite that because that group exists as something that can be inventoried by the meeting process itself, by Exchange Calendar, actually, for the booking. The private channel, it's a subgroup, and it's saying, I'm going to exclude that entire group. So when you try to invite that private channel, it says, I don't know, I'm private, you can't see me. So you cannot schedule a recurring meeting through Microsoft Exchange with a private channel. So that's just currently a limitation. You can, and I'm not a big fan of private channels. They have their place, but I think you can emulate some of that functionality just by, for example, I want a group of students to collaborate together, create a meeting for them that already just exists on its own. It's a little bit more work, and this speaks to some of that need to get some of those groups that are manually created and learned and synchronized so that they actually exist as objects. Paul Dietrich is working on that, so we're going to try to get some of that functionality. That would allow then to ignore the fact that private channels exist. Use private channels when you really want to restrict content. I don't want these groups seeing each other's work. That's what private channels are useful for. But you can also emulate that by having a group chat that does that. You can emulate that through other tools that are available as well. So yeah, it's a limitation. I don't know if that fully sort of addresses what Scott was trying to touch on, just sort of that limitation of functionality. The fact that you might want to use something like Bongo Classroom for having the one-on-one bookable meetings with people. There's just all these different tools, and we'll have to figure it out. Meetings for private channels. A workaround is you can get the email address for the private channel. Okay. Yes, that's true. You can do that. I've had limited experience with that. So Nadine, did you want to speak about how that works?
So we have writing groups, and each one is a private channel so that grad students can talk about their work in a secure environment, and they use the Meet Now button typically to have their regularly scheduled writing sessions. But some of the groups want the scheduled writing sessions to appear in students' calendars. So what they've done is they've clicked on the little ellipses beside Meet Now, selected get the email address for the private channel.
Okay.
And then opened up Outlook and used Outlook to schedule a meeting with that email address.
Okay.
And then the people who are members of that private channel will receive that invitation.
This is why this is a great collaboration platform, team. So people figure these things out, right? So thank you for sharing that. Yes. So in noting that you would have to use Outlook for this, I believe. No, yeah. You could use the Teams. So if you've ever looked at Teams, there's a calendar as well. That is just a snapshot of your own personal Outlook calendar. So just in case you're thinking you have two different calendars, one in Teams, one in Exchange, they are the same thing. The nice thing about the Teams version of calendar is if you're trying to schedule your team itself, it does provide a box for looking up that team and finding that email address for the public team, not for the private channels, but that's a lovely workaround, just finding the team email address itself. Now, when it books that, though, it doesn't inventory the individuals, right? It just sends it to the team. So students do have to make sure they add it to their calendar. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
It's hard to know as the owner what the students are seeing on their end.
Yeah. Okay.
So we are now running very close to the end of the workshop. So I did want to just wrap things up and assure you that if we find anything in the chat that we haven't addressed, that we promise to go through it and come up with a response and send it out to the full group. I also mentioned this comparison table that we have that's for the strictly for MS Teams versus Bongo. So you have a sense of what you can do within the Learn space versus outside of the Learn space. and we will share that out after the workshop as well to everyone in attendance. And finally, the recording will become available. Mark, I believe you said it would be a part of the CT YouTube channel, so that's where it will reside moving forward if you wish to refer back to anything we've discussed. I want to thank everyone, especially all the wonderful presenters, but all of you for your brilliant questions. This has been a wonderful session because of your contribution, so thank you ever so much. And all the very best. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye for now.